What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and if you're enjoying the content here on my channel, then make sure you hit the like button and make sure you hit subscribe so you can help decide what direction the content on my channel goes in the foreseeable future. So I've been sitting here thinking on whether or not I'm going to cover Black Vortex. And I mean, we have a little while. I mean, we've got a little bit. In truth, my main goal with Guardians of the Galaxy stuff this week, I mean, we are still going to do things like Aliens Nightmare Asylum, where like the xenomorphs infest Earth and different things like that. But in terms of the Guardians content that we're going to be doing, my main emphasis is to basically give people like the runs of Guardians of the Galaxy. So we just kind of start with Bendis's run and go all the way up to right now, this moment in Marvel Comics, so people can see how we got from point A to point B, and they can basically be caught up on the Guardians. So they have all the information they need if they want to go out and start buying books, or at the very least, be aware of what's going on by the time the movie comes out. So with regards to the stories right now, we're actually going to kind of, jump forward a little bit, and we're going to focus on the idea of all the Guardians of the Galaxy becoming Venom. It's really, really cool. One thing to keep in mind is that in the last video, we had talked about how Flash Thompson had basically been sent to the Guardians of the Galaxy by the Avengers following the events of Superior Venom. Of course, we'll talk about that video, or I guess we'll do that video on Monday. But with regards to Flash Thompson, he was really like more of an envoy for the Avengers with the Guardians. So he would be able to kind of segue back and forth between the two groups. And it was just a way for the Avengers to keep in contact with the Guardians, because the Guardians were always kind of running around the galaxy and different things like that. The issue was that once the Venom symbiote was taken by the Skrulls and then recaptured by Flash, he chose not to rejoin the Guardians. Instead, he decided to kind of go back and make his own way. Now, the reason for this is because of the fact that had he gone to the Guardians and said, look, I want to go back to Earth, that probably wouldn't have happened. I mean, he was there to be an envoy, he was there to fulfill a job, and the Guardians probably would have made him finish that job. But for Flash, his desire was to always go back home. He just kind of had enough of being out in space, and that made sense. With regards to Flash Thompson, as a character, I would surmise that he probably felt a little more at home on Earth than he does out in space, because he has a solid grasp. Space is uncharted territory. While this wouldn't normally matter for various superheroes, for Flash Thompson, it's kind of a big deal because he's just sort of out there in no man's land. And so while he's overhearing a discussion about some member of the Kree talking about how he's been to Earth, of course his goal is to return. And so this Venom symbiote just essentially kind of loses its mind and begins attacking this guy, desiring to have information on how to return to Earth. Now, of course, when this Kree guy isn't able to provide that information that Flash Thompson needs, the Venom symbiote effectively kills him. And so again, from here, we kind of switch over to Kitty Pryde and Star-Lord. And this is kind of a cool thing, is because the two of them are currently in a relationship right now. I mean, again, a lot of these different things came out of like the Infinity storyline and, superheroes crossing over who wouldn't necessarily cross over, different things like that. But the relationship between the two was always kind of cool, because Peter Quill was just like a wildly irresponsible person, right? Like, I mean, he's the last person you'd want to go on a date with, because he just isn't a responsible human being in a lot of ways. He's still very childish. He has yet to really grow up. But the environment of the Guardians lends itself to that mindset, in the sense that he can be brash, he can be reckless, he could go out there and be kind of crazy. At the same time, Kitty Pryde is the opposite. She's very responsible. She's very resourceful. She's a large part of the X-Men community right now. Now, of course, this could very well be just kind of wishful thinking, right? Like Kitty Pryde's like, man, my life is really boring. I want to live through Star-Lord. I want to go out into space, and I want to be reckless and irresponsible and different things like that. Again, it's kind of funny, with regards to how these characters mesh, but it's very much the idea that opposites attract. The issue here is that they're not physically with one another. Instead, Kitty Pryde's here as a hologram. It's the only way they can really maintain a long distance relationship. Now, the other half of this is that Peter Quill is spilling a lot of truths that he believes will basically solidify the strength of their relationship. The problem is that the truths he's spilling are a problem. He's basically telling Kitty Pryde when things get stressful, like he sleeps around, and like he sleeps around a lot. And I don't know why you would tell the woman that you're interested in that you do that. But the bigger point that he's trying to make here is that of all the women he's ever been with, Kitty Pryde is the one that has the biggest impact on him the most. Now, the way he could have gone about telling her that could have been a little bit better. I mean, I wouldn't really sit down on a date with a woman and say, hey, look, I've been with hundreds of women. I've been with so many women, but you are the greatest woman that I've met. Most women would not be receptive to that. They would say, okay, well, that's cool, but I've got a friend who has an emergency, and that emergency requires me to be anywhere but here right now. So because of that, she would basically just bail out. But again, it's also this idea that the Guardians are still kind of out there. They're still kind of doing their own thing. It's really one of these R&R sessions, right? Like where the Guardians aren't together 100% of the time. There are times when they go out and they just go and do their own thing. Now, in the midst of this, remember, we had talked about this bartender that Flash Thompson and Drax the Destroyer first ran into when Flash was basically given new weapons, this guy who was basically dealing in illegal arms trades. But Flash Thompson goes back and visits this bartender because this bartender seemed to express information that he knew a lot about the history of the symbiote. Now, of course, Flash trying to get this information out of him, it doesn't initially work. Of course, this is compounded by the fact that Gamora shows up. Remember, she's just kind of out doing her own thing. But when she finds Flash, her response is, look, we've been hunting all over the galaxy for you. We've been trying to find you forever. Where did you go? Well, without a word, the Venom symbiote immediately attacks. Now, the funny thing about this is that we're actually going to find there's a lot more going on here than what initially seems to be taking place. Whereas it seems like the Venom symbiote's kind of taken on a life of its own and it's just attacking indiscriminately, that there's actually going to be something a little more taking place, which is actually really cool, the way that Bendis builds this in. But the Venom symbiote seems to be speaking more so than Flash, in the sense that the Venom symbiote is basically saying things like, hey, you brought me out here because you didn't want me to be on Earth. You consider me to be a danger. You guys want to ruin me. You guys want to destroy my purpose, corrupt me as being like a superhero on Earth. All you guys are doing is ruining everything. Now, of course, this eventually leads into Flash Thompson more or less taking over control of the Venom symbiote, and then in turn, the Guardians arriving and stripping him of the Venom symbiote itself. So of course, the two are basically isolated from one another. Now, this is where Bendis starts to focus on the symbiote, and it's kind of cool because we had never seen anything like this in Marvel Comics. There's never been an instance when a writer sat down and said, you know what, let's explore the nature of the Venom symbiote. Let's make it more than just something that attacks, attaches itself to some guy and then decides it wants to kill Peter Parker. Let's do a little bit of exploring. Let's do a little bit of testing the waters. Let's see what we can do with this small little tidbit of the Marvel landscape that's wildly popular. And so while on board the Guardian ship, it's actually kind of funny when it happens because it's one of these things that you could really see in the movie, where Rocket Raccoon is kind of focused on different parts and different things, when he's like, hey, look, can you help me with this so we can figure out what's going on with this symbiote? Because the entire time it's contained. Well, then the symbiote basically breaks loose and attaches itself to Groot. And so Groot becomes Venom. And it looks so cool. It looks so amazing. It's one of the coolest things that's going to happen. Now, while this is taking place, the stage is actually being set for another story coming up. Again, this is what Bendis does. Bendis will usually say, hey, look, here's a story we have going on, but we're going to plant the seeds. We're going to go throw in a little tidbits, a few little goodies here and there, so we can segue into another story. So they're basically overlapping events. They're overlapping stories, but it's not done in a confusing way. It's done in a way that works. But basically, following the events of the ousting of Jason of Spartax, the fact that he was basically kicked out as the Emperor once Peter basically broadcast out to the galaxy that Jason was willing to kill his own son to maintain his own power, then the question becomes, well, who's going to rule Spartax in his stead? And the answer that's given by the ruling body is that it's going to be Peter Quill. The issue with this is that he does not have to be present, and he does not even have to run for election in order to be appointed to president. He's just appointed to that position and then taken and made president. So it's almost like he has no choice in the matter, which is kind of interesting. Of course, we're going to see that come to fruition later on, and that's really going to kind of set the stage going into all new, all different Marvel with regards to the new Guardians of the Galaxy as it's been reformed and, Kitty Pryde and that kind of a thing. But, getting back to the Guardians, the funny thing is people are just like, what in the heck is going on? Why is Groot Venom? And it's kind of funny because all Groot says is, I am Venom. That's the only thing he says. So it's kind of cool that we get get this whole idea maintained of how he goes or how he functions in relation to being Venom, in the sense that it's still very much the same Groot that we were always aware of. Now, the other cool thing about this is that he's able to go toe to toe, like Drax the Destroyer, Gamora, so on and so forth. It's kind of cool to see it happen, but it's not unheard of. Back in the Incredible Hulk Annual number 5, before Groot became the character as we know him, he was just a giant tree villain. Is really all he was, a Flora Colossi. And because of that, he was actually, and I don't remember who it was that wrote the story, but he was used or recreated really by some crazy guy and was one of like 6 villains to go against the Incredible Hulk. And so we actually got to see a story where Groot fights the Hulk, and that story will be covered. Do not worry, Rob Core, I will not leave you hanging. We will see the story of Groot versus the Hulk. But the fact remains here that with regards to the symbiote, it's still very much just the symbiote's nature in and of itself, its weaknesses, the various issues like that. So of course, where Drax is initially able to overcome the Venom symbiote, or at the very least, purge it directly from Groot by quite literally just kind of punching it in a weak spot, the Venom symbiote then turns around and attaches itself to Rocket Raccoon, which is cool. Like it's really kind of funny to see. Now, of course, this comes after the Venom symbiote sort of escapes through the tunnels or through the ductwork and so on and so forth. But Rocket as Venom looks really awesome. Now, it looks really cool. Now, here's where we get a little bit more information in terms of what's going on here. I mean, Bendis isn't just simply saying, hey, what would it look like if the Venom symbiote was attaching to like the different members of the Guardians of the Galaxy? The Venom symbiote's basically wanting to kick everybody off the ship and then go back to its home planet. Kind of sidetracking for a second, we actually end up picking up with
Carol Danvers. I remember during Kelly Sue DeConnick's run, her goal was to remove Carol Danvers from Earth and make her a tried and true Captain Marvel that traversed the spaceways and dealt with crime kind of all over the galaxy. So of course, she's basically within the realm of nowhere, within the bar of nowhere, just kind of hanging out, stopping criminals who are committing crimes, robbing people, different things like that. But then she basically comes across a giant broadcast that's basically been said that Peter Quill's been appointed to president of Spartak. So again, kind of funny to see. It's a little of a tidbit, but again, Peter doesn't know about any of this. He's not aware that any of this is happening. Instead, he's dealing with Rocket Raccoon, like Rocket Groot or Rocket Venom. I almost said Rocket Groot. I would love to see a Rocket Raccoon and like Groot hybrid. That'd be kind of cool to see. But the fact remains that Rocket Raccoon, of course, again, is basically apprehended immediately by Drax, and that's really what happens. Bendis takes this pretty quick in terms of the Venom symbiote jumping from one person to the next, but when Drax seizes control of the Venom symbiote, then Drax himself becomes Venom. Now, this is kind of interesting because again, the narrative remains the same. As Groot, the Venom symbiote couldn't communicate itself. When it took over Rocket, the Venom symbiote said, well, you guys are getting off this ship and I'm heading to a different location. With Drax seizing control of Rocket and then becoming Venom, Drax himself takes out the rest of the Guardians of the Galaxy and then basically takes the entire group back to the planet of the symbiotes. Now, the cool thing about this is when Bendis basically begins to explore everything. And what we end up finding out here is that the Venom symbiote was actually functioning according to what it needed to do, but it was also very much corrupted. And that's kind of the crazy thing here is what they do once they actually emerge out into, the planet symbiote itself, is that the planet is entirely composed of symbiotes. Whether it's bonded to things, whether the symbiotes have taken on a life of their own, the planet is basically symbiote at its core. And that's what's so cool about this is because we never knew this. All we knew was that this symbiote just kind of popped up in the original Secret Wars story. We never knew where it came from. It bonded itself to Peter Parker. It was brought back to Earth, and the adventures of Venom and Carnage started after that. It was just, that's it. That's all we had. That's all we knew. And that's why this story is so cool, because it gives us a bunch of that information. It gives us a lot of those things. Now, initially, the opportunities offered to the members of the Guardians to allow themselves to bond with the symbiotes. Now, we're not initially told why. We're simply just told, look, the symbiotes are extending an olive branch, and we can either join them or we can just kind of hang back in the ship. Now, of course, Flash Thompson shares a kind of kinship with the symbiotes that no one else has. And so he immediately just kind of allows himself to bond with it. And this is when he sort of chimes up and says, hey, look, guys, basically bonding with us is the only way they can communicate. The symbiotes cannot communicate in the sense of using vocal patterns or anything like that. The symbiotes basically communicate by using a host. And so, of course, when the rest of the Guardians begin to jump in, this is when we start to learn the purpose of the symbiotes. And what we find out is that by their very nature, by their very definition, the symbiotes are neither good nor evil. They're essentially just kind of benign beings that exist, but they serve the purpose of creating more or less an intergalactic police force. The problem with this is that in order for them to fulfill their true purpose, they require a host who's basically of good moral fiber and physically pure. And so they have to be good guys in every sense of the word, literally, metaphorically, the whole nine yards. Peter Parker was a reflection of that. The issue is that Peter Parker chose to cast his symbiote off, and the symbiote itself began to hate Peter Parker. And that's the way these two things function. That's kind of the retcon that Brian Michael Bendis is throwing in here. Under normal circumstances, when a symbiote and a host bond in perfect harmony, the character going forward is a force to be reckoned with. But if there's any kind of corruption, if the person is inherently evil, or if they become evil, they will corrupt the symbiote, and the symbiote will take on a life of its own, effectively becoming a bad guy. Now, of course, this offers a bootstrapped explanation in terms of the Venom symbiote giving birth to Carnage, Carnage becoming a bad guy, different things like that. But the fact remains here that because of the fact that there have been instances where the symbiotes have bonded themselves to people and in turn basically become bad guys, it's led to this reputation within the galaxy that the symbiotes are inherently evil. The difference with this, and one of the things that Bendis offers here, is that Flash Thompson was the perfect host, in the sense that because of the things that Flash Thompson had done in his past, because of the fact that he had lost his legs in the military, it had offered him a new lease on life. And with the Venom symbiote, he sought redemption. He sought the idea to make himself a good guy. And so he was able to effectively kind of bring the Venom symbiote back towards the road of redemption, removing it away from the realm of being a villain and transforming it into a good guy. And so because of this, the other symbiotes look on to Flash Thompson and say, you are the, basically a perfect host. You are the kind of being that we look for when it comes to us bonding to one particular person. And so what they do is they effectively upgrade his symbiote. That's really what it is. They upgrade the Venom symbiote and then restore it to him. And so what it does is it allows him to kind of go forward with a whole host of new abilities that he never had before. Now, of course, this segues directly into Venom Space Knight. It's really what that does. But the idea here is that it's basically kind of Bendis using the legacy, using the history of the symbiotes themselves to essentially jumpstart and move forward the legacy of Flash Thompson Thompson as Venom, you know, the legacy of Agent Venom, in order to make him someone new. Now, this does not like regrow limbs or anything, so his legs are still gone, but it still allows him to basically function as an intergalactic force, as an intergalactic guy who's able to sort of, you know, be a hero. The reason why that was done was because of the fact that the Agent Venom line of stories was kind of moving towards a place of stagnation, in the sense that you could only do so many stories. Fans wanted to see something new. Fans wanted to see things kind of move in a new direction. It doesn't mean they didn't like Agent Venom. Fans loved Agent Venom, but it's one of those things of, hey, look, looking to the future, there's only so many stories that we can do. And so let's kind of get ahead of the curve and let's begin the process of moving Venom away from being an Earth-based hero and give him a new line of stories, and we'll just kind of see what happens from there. The issue is that once it got into Venom Space Knight, a lot of people didn't really care for it too much, and that kind of led to the downward spiral of Venom going back to Eddie Brock and that kind of a thing. It was kind of a sad turn of events. A lot of people are really upset that we don't get Agent Venom anymore, and a lot of people are really upset that Flash Thompson isn't Venom anymore. I mean, in truth, if I were Marvel, I probably would have made him Flash Thompson. I like the idea of Eddie Brock being Venom now in Marvel Now 2.0, but I understand that a lot of people really want Agent Venom to come out. There were great stories, man. They were good stories. It was cool to see. Like, it was a cool concept for Marvel to create. So I wouldn't mind seeing Agent Venom come back, but I am kind of glad that the Venom symbiote is back with Eddie Brock, at least in Marvel Now 2.0. Of course, I have that video here on my channel, and you can find it down in the description. But in any event, what this story does is it basically just kind of segues into what the next story will be, the next video will do, where it turns out that Peter Quill basically learns, hey man, you've been elected president of Spartax. Good luck dealing with that one. But in any event, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and yeah, I will catch you all later. Peace.